really think about how you listen. And when I ask that question to people, normally I'll get a response, something along the lines of, I use active listening, or 2 ears, 1 mouth, or I listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. And they are all good things, right? I'm not knocking those things at all. They're valuable things, but they're quite superficial and they're very subjective. So really deep, advanced listening is applying a model. Like any skill, listening can be improved through the use of models. And we have very specific technical models we can use to help us listen much better. So advanced deep listening is being very deliberate about how we listen to extract every single piece of information we can from the conversation we're having.
And welcome to this episode of the Sales Today podcast, where I am delighted to be joined by Graham Drew. Graham helps improve businesses through advanced deep listening. And so I thought I want to get him on the podcast because one thing salespeople think they're great at is listening, but what we know they're often not great at is listening. So Graham, welcome first up.
Thanks, Fred.
Looking forward to hearing, or probably not looking forward to hearing about the stuff that we can all do better. But yeah, deep listening, I mean, it's an easy question to start with. What is it?
Well, thanks for the question, Fred. Really great to be here. Deep listening. Let me tell you a very quick story that will then put deep listening in context. So I've got quite an unusual career history, Fred. I started life as a salesperson. I was okay at that. I had some good wins. And then quite unusually, I took the opportunity to go to the other side of the table. And I set up and ran a global procurement function for a company in the city for a few years. And that gave me quite a unique insight into the buying-selling relationship and what works and what doesn't work. And I was reflecting on that and looking at some deals that really should have happened but didn't, and trying to unpick what had gone wrong. And I had one of those aha moments. And the aha moment was, we're just not listening to each other. There are deals that should definitely be taking place, opportunities to close that didn't close. And the reason was salespeople and procurement people weren't listening to each other. And that set me on this whole journey to understand, well, why is that happening? And how can we get better at listening?
Oh, brilliant. Interesting angle already. I mean, I knew your background about sales and procurement, which is why it's so interesting for you to come on this particular podcast. And what I also like is that it's not just the salespeople who are at fault here. It takes two to tango, as they say. So everybody can benefit from this deeper listening. So yeah, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so look, let me ask you a question, Fred. But this is really a question to your listeners as well. Just take a moment to think about this. How do you listen? So when you're in a conversation with someone, in a meeting, in an important discussion, how do you listen? I'm not going to ask you to answer that, Fred, actually, but the people listening to this podcast might just want to give that a bit of thought. Really think about how do you listen. And when I ask that question to people, normally I'll get a response, something along the lines of, I use active listening, or 2 ears, 1 mouth, or I listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. And they are all good things, right? I'm not knocking those things at all. They're valuable things, but they're quite superficial and they're very subjective. So really deep, advanced listening is applying a model. Like any skill, listening can be improved through the use of models. And we have very specific technical models we can use to help us listen much better. So advanced deep listening is being very deliberate about how we listen to extract every single piece of information we can from the conversation we're having.
Brilliant. You're using some words there that I love, like deliberate. I'm always talking to salespeople about being conscious, about being deliberate. I know some people sometimes shy away from models, but modeling is about capturing best practice, isn't it? That's what you're doing, is you're going, right, this is what the best listeners do. This is how to make it work best. You will share the model with us, won't you?
No, yeah, of course I will.
No,
Of
okay,
course,
shortest podcast ever. Well done, thank you.
of course I'll share them. Before I share the model, though, I'd just like to talk, particularly with the sales community in mind. This deep advanced listening stuff. This applies to everyone, any role, any function, any industry. But just thinking about salespeople, I looked at some of the research about listening in sales, and there's, as you might imagine, there's a lot. So this is really getting to the why question before we get to the how answer. The why, answering the why question. You look at things like LinkedIn status sales. So the LinkedIn status sales report, what's the number one skill valued by buyers? It's listening on behalf of the salesperson. It's the number one. It's not product knowledge. It's not commercial acumen. It's not stakeholder management. It's listening.
Yeah.
Right. So buyers are telling us that listening is really important. On top of that, there's more than 20 years of research about the effect of good listening by salespeople, and it is unequivocal now that people who apply really good listening skills in a sales environment, they win more business, they qualify faster, they build really trusting, deep relationships with clients, they get repeat business, they're perceived to be leaders. So good listening puts you in a position where other people perceive you to be more of a leader. And on top of that, and here's the sort of slightly counterintuitive thing, being a really great listener also enables you to earn the right to be listened to. Because selling does mean you do have to transmit sometimes. You have to share information and ideas with your prospects and customers, but you have to earn the right to be listened to. And being a good listener helps you earn that right through reciprocity.
Oh, I love that. I mean, they're all interesting. That thing about being perceived to be a leader by someone who listens better. Again, so many of these things could be a podcast on their own, couldn't they? But yeah, we do talk about earn the right a lot. And I suspect some people will have heard that and they'll think, oh, that's how I deliver my value prop. That's how I show the stuff that people are now going to want to take more attention to me or pay more attention to me. What you're saying is actually your listening skills is going to go a long way to achieve that.
100%. So here's a little tip. Going into any conversation, this is the mantra, this is a really simple thing that I just repeat to myself before any conversation, which is, this person wants to be heard. This person wants to be heard. So the person we're meeting with, or the meeting we're going into, the other person is going to talk about stuff. Right. And I've been there as a salesperson. Sometimes you get into a conversation or a meeting and you think, yeah, this is all fascinating, but I really want to get to the important stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And let's just be honest, that's how it feels. Okay. We've got targets to meet and quotas to have and meetings to have and all those things. But to the other person, however inconsequential it may sound to us, what they're saying is really important. So what we need to ask ourselves is, why is this person saying what they're saying? And why are they saying it in the way they're saying it? And we need to be really deliberate about thinking about what we're hearing. And I will get to the model, Fred. I know you want to. I'll get to the model because the model's all about unpicking that.
No, I think that was interesting because, but I'm thinking of a conversation that I've just had where, in fact, it was me talking. I was talking about stuff completely irrelevant to what that meeting was about, because it was stuff that was going on in my head, which I kind of needed to kind of get rid of. I needed to free up. I just needed to let out to then have the attention to what we were actually supposed to be talking about. Is that the kind of thing that you mean? Wait till I've like, come on, this has got nothing to do with anything. For me, it had, because I couldn't concentrate without getting it gone, if you like.
I mean, Fred, that's a perfect example. So imagine you're in that meeting, and imagine the person you were meeting hadn't done a good job of listening and had just tried to close you down and then talk about what's important to them. I mean, not only would that be rude and incredibly frustrating, but actually would have been really counterproductive. The interesting thing is, to the person who's trying to get their point across, they feel like what they've done is been clever. They've sort of closed down your ramble, your uninteresting conversation to get to the thing that's interesting to them. But you're not ready to receive that information yet. You're not ready to listen. So actually, it's a full step, and that's just going to set you back.
Yeah. No, well, maybe it's my limited processing capacity. I would not have listened to them because I'd still be trying to figure out what it is that I'd arrived in that state thinking about. So, top piece of advice already. I like that one. This person wants to be heard. Love it. Okay, what else?
Okay, so what else? Let's talk about the model.
Yeah.
So let's go back to this question of how do you listen? And I'm hoping people listening to this podcast have sort of thought about it and maybe concluded that they couldn't really describe how they listen. They know they do it. And with your audience are sales professionals, right? So they'll have read the books, they'll have been on sales training, they'll have given this a lot of thought. This isn't, the fact that listening is important will be no surprise to anyone in your community, Fred. So, but maybe people can't articulate how they do it. And that's a bit of a problem, right? Because how we do it is really important. So one more soundbite before I get into the model. There is a problem and an opportunity in the way we listen. Most people speak at something like 125, 150 words a minute. I'm quite a fast talker, so maybe I'm 150, something like that. But most people talk in that kind of speed. The problem and opportunity we have is the brain is able to absorb and assimilate information much quicker than that. So something between 400 and 900 words a minute.
Okay.
Right. So we've got this problem where we've got people talking at 125 words a minute and the brain working at 400 to 900 words a minute. Now, you could argue that means we could be phenomenal listeners because we've got this spare processing capacity in the brain. That means we could really tune in and be very attentive listeners. But we don't. What we tend to do is get distracted. And we get the inner monologue that starts thinking about, oh, when am I going to get lunch? And I'm feeling a bit cold or tired or whatever it may be. And then we get distractions like, especially when we're working at home or working remotely, we've got our Slack messages going on and Instagram and somebody's knocking at the door and the dog's barking, whatever it is. So we've got all this stuff happening that stops us listening in the way we could. So this is where we go back to the model. We need a model to give us a little bit of discipline, almost like a handrail, to be clear about actually, how do I give my maximum attention to the person that's speaking, and how do I process it in the right way? So here's the model. Okay, it's a really simple 4-step model that was created by some wonderful researchers, Style, Watson, and Barker. If you want to look them up, there's lots of information on the internet, and there's some papers that I can send to people if they're interested. But they created a brilliant model, 4-step model. For the 4 steps, and I'll go through these in a bit of detail, but the 4 steps are sense, interpret, evaluate, and respond. So sense, interpret, evaluate, respond. So let's look at those 4 steps. Mm-hmm. So when we're listening to someone, the first thing we want to do, this is the sensing stage, we want to be on turn our listening radar on full power and absorb every scrap of information we can from the other person. We want to listen with real attention to the words they use, so the verbal communication. And we also want to observe the non-verbal, the body language. We want to get as much of that richness as we possibly can about what that person is communicating. So we're very deliberate about sensing. Full attention, no distractions, full attention on what the other person is saying. If we don't do this bit right, Fred, forget it, nothing else works. So the sensing bit is really important.
And so sorry to interrupt you, listening skills, but I want to clarify. Within nonverbal, you're also talking about pitch, pace, and tone, and all of those elements as well. Yep. Yeah. So every single part of the message we need to absorb. Yeah.
And in fact, you can even go a stage further than that. In one of the exercises we run in the workshops I run, we look at why is that person communicating from that location? Why have they got, why have I got pictures behind me? Why I've got books behind me? Why have you got your fabulous books behind you? There's a reason why they're there. Very deliberate. Okay, so we look at, well,
they just happen to be there, my books, Graham. They just, I just left it
So
there.
you can start to
Yeah.
unpick,
Yeah.
a much richer message than just the words. So that's the sensing bit. That's giving us as much as we can from the other person. Then we do the interpret bit. Okay, so first stage is sensing, next stage is interpret. So the interpret bit is to ask ourselves, what did they mean? Why did they say what they said in the way they said it? This is not about us still. This is about the person we're listening to. What did they mean? And we give some real thought to, why did Fred or whoever say what they said in the way they said it? What was their intention? And we're very deliberate about not thinking about what we think about that yet. We're thinking, what do they mean? And only when we've satisfied ourselves that we've really thought about what that other person meant, then we can move to the third stage, the evaluate stage. This is when we start. This is when we get in our own heads now a little bit, and less about the other person. So we've sensed the full message, we've interpreted what they meant. We get to the evaluate stage. The evaluate stage is us thinking, well, what do I think about that? I've listened to what Fred said. Do I agree or disagree? What does it mean? Why did he say that? What are the implications of what I've heard? What does it mean for our relationship? What does it mean in the sales context? What might that mean for how I go about qualifying this opportunity or this? What does it mean for the commercial negotiation we're having, or whatever it may be? So I'm now thinking, what does this mean to me? And critically, only then are we equipped to go to the respond stage. Now, the respond stage might be me saying something back, or it might be me thinking something, making a decision, or taking some kind of action. Here's the big challenge. So the universal challenge, this is human nature, right? And my passion is listening, and I'm guilty of this like everyone else is. Sometimes if we're not being deliberate about listening, we'll do a little bit about the sensing bit, just enough to get the message. We'll sort of completely ignore the interpret and evaluate bit and get straight into respond. Because we can't wait to have our voice heard, right? So It's my turn now, great, I can transmit. And one of the reasons why we like the model is it breaks down, it disconnects sensing and respond and gives us the kind of the cognitive process of the discipline of thinking, what did they mean and what does it mean to me before I respond?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So very deliberate breakdown. And so what that's doing is that, sorry, let me go back over that. You have the mental capacity to do this because you're hearing at the 400, 900, I think you said, whereas they're speaking at 120, 150. So you can use that extra capacity for that, not to be looking at Facebook out the window, making a shopping list in your head, doing whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
Be very deliberate in step through these things carefully. Their intention, what that means to you, then time to do something.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so here's the other challenge. I'd love to say this stuff's easy, but it's not. So here's the other challenge. The other challenge is breaking our addiction to distractions. So there are a number of, I call them barriers to listening. In fact, there are 8 different types of barriers to listening, and distractions is one of them. And the sad truth is, we are all addicted to distractions in one form or another. So the thing that's happening outside the window while someone's talking, the person that's just walked into the room, the fact that my tummy might be rumbling because I'm hungry, the Slack message that's just come up, the fact that I'm expecting a phone call, I've just had a row with my significant other and I'm thinking about that, or I've got an important meeting this afternoon, or my car park I need to go and pay a parking ticket or something. They're all things that are going on in the back of our head, and they very quickly come to the front of our head and we zone out, and we all do it. We all do it. So we have those moments. Fred, you must have had it when you're talking to someone and all of a sudden you think, just zone out for a minute.
Yeah.
It happens to everyone, right? And this is where we need to get really deliberate about catching that really quickly and getting back into the room and being, very self-aware about when that happens. And there are some tools and techniques we use to do that.
Again, interested in those, but I'm interested in the word you use, which is addicted. That's a strong word, and again, one I'm sensing that you didn't use accidentally.
No.
Why that particular word? How are we addicted?
So, well, here's a good example. I run a physical workshop recently. So we're in the room,
Wow,
physical workshop,
how
and
bizarre.
I know it's unusual, isn't it? And just for fun, in fact, just as nothing to do with listening particularly, but I just read a piece of research that a colleague of mine had sent me about mobile phones. And there's a piece of research that says even the presence of a mobile phone, your mobile phone in the room, reduces your intellectual capacity, right? So one of the things I did was I said to people, I want you to turn your phones off because we're doing some training now. In fact, I want you to leave them in the cupboard as a secure cupboard. Put them in the cupboard, so not even on the desk.
Yeah.
And then and people did that, And over lunch, somebody said, they felt quite uncomfortable doing that, being just physically remote from their phone. And then, you start to have a conversation around that about what's going on. And actually, we know that apps like Instagram and others are designed to create a dopamine hit. So every time you get a like or a ping on your phone or an alert, it gives you that little dopamine hit, doesn't it? And that's why I use the term addicted.
Yeah.
There are, these barriers to listening, some of these external distractions, like having Slack messages on while you're on a call like this, they are, I think they're really addictive. And I say to people, well, turn it off, turn the notifications off. Not necessarily for every meeting you have, because that might not be feasible, but if you're having an important conversation with a customer, turn the notifications off. And people feel very uncomfortable doing it. And they know they should, but they don't.
Yeah, I remember reading about that recently. I think they got twins, didn't they, doing IQ tests or something?
Oh,
And I think that's what they did. And they sort of had one set of twins and they left the phone on the desk off, the other out. And I think it's about 10% higher score in the IQ. So, I mean, it's a significant thing for them to have made that. And actually just reminded me of something, but I wish I remember who said this, so I should give credit, but it was somebody I'd heard speaking about the fact that in the 1960s, the cleverest people on the planet were trying to put a man on the moon. Now the cleverest people on the planet are employed by companies to keep you on their platforms.
Yes.
I mean, they're using very, very clever folk who understand the brain, how it works, and the science involved to keep you scrolling, to keep you messing about on there.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's nothing to do with anything, but little distraction there.
Well, so let me ask the listeners to your podcast, right? And I want people just be honest with themselves. However fascinating you and I are, Fred, how many people on this podcast have already had a look at LinkedIn while they're listening, maybe on Instagram, Facebook, walked off and done something else, And I'm not criticizing people for doing it, by the way. I'm just highlighting that there are situations, listening to this podcast, that might be fine, okay?
Yeah.
But there are situations where you definitely don't want to be doing that. Yeah. And yet, time after time, I work with teams who allow that to happen. And it's almost like an unconscious thing. Yeah. And they have this sudden realization of, wow, I've just missed so much.
Yeah. I think podcasts is probably a bad example, actually. So I think the popularity is that you can do something else while it's on, and people are cooking, doing the washing up, taking the dog for a walk, driving the car, whatever. But yeah, I absolutely, and I can think of times where, because I do try to be more conscious about this, and when I get it, I'm like in my phone or on my phone doing something, but I was supposed to be watching the rugby on telly, or I was supposed to be watching a film that I really wanted to see. I was supposed to be, and this is just like silly examples, but the thing has dragged me to it. It's very worrying.
So here's the interesting thing about the model, by the way. And I'll make a guarantee. I very rarely do this, but I will make a guarantee to people, right?
On my podcast. It's from you. Can we be clear? Can everyone just hear that? Can everyone just listen to that quite carefully?
And and you know where to find me on LinkedIn if anyone disagrees. Applying this model will, as a minimum, enable people to get 25% more value from every conversation, as a minimum, right? And I say that with absolute confidence, having done a lot of research and applied it and seen it applied by people that come through the program we run. So you're going to get 25% more value. And here's another, for anyone who doubts the experience, really interesting piece of research done in Boston in the US a few years ago now, back in the 90s. And it was looking at how much information people can absorb and retain. So imagine going into a meeting, and before you go into a meeting, somebody says, look, I'm really interested to know, just pay full attention, won't you? Because tomorrow I'm going to ask you what you heard in the meeting. Not like to recite every word, just remember the important stuff. And so they ran some experiments, and the outcome of that experiment, even people who were told, tomorrow I'm going to ask you about this, they could recall 25% of what happened in the meeting. People who weren't briefed in advance, so people who didn't know they were going to be asked, obviously it was much less, it's sort of 15, 17%. So we know that what we've got is this big opportunity where people are getting a quarter to a half of what they could if only they applied the discipline in the model to listen really effectively.
And I mean, and so that's what your program takes people through, and it's a lot more depth. But what you're saying, if I got that right, is the first thing is just be conscious of it. Just recognize the 4 steps, disconnect from the fact that you've heard something to say something straight away. Do that. Well, what are they trying to say? That bit really caught my attention, actually, because I remember another expression, which, well, I don't, so I'm about to get it wrong, but it's communication is the response it elicits. I think it's along those lines, isn't it? That you might have said something and meant something, but actually it's what the other person heard, which is kind of actually what communication is. So what you're doing is giving somebody almost like the courtesy, go, well, I heard that. That's what I originally heard, but did they really mean that? Should I just double check? They probably didn't mean to come across like that. It was something else that they might have been saying. Yeah. So you're just sort of sense checking that. Okay, so what does that mean to me? The thing they did mean to say, and now, okay, I'm going to respond to that then, rather than whoa, that came across really badly. Bosh. Yeah,
that's exactly it. Yeah. And of course, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, there's everything right with qualifying with someone. Hey, look, I think what I heard you say was X. Yeah. Have I understood that correctly? There's a very prolific writer on LinkedIn, a lady called Sharon Drew Morgan. No relation to me, I have to say, even though we share the Drew bit of the surname. And she talks a lot about how frequently people can misunderstand what's being communicated. And she's got some wonderful tips about how to really check back in with someone to say, look, I heard this, but is that what you meant? So look her up, she's good.
Yeah, no, she just talked a hell of a lot about sales, hasn't she? She's got quite an interesting sales model.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
which makes you think. I mean, it certainly made me think when I read it. Okay, so question for you then: what we're entering a kind of an age, or we're in an age now where lots of things are recorded. There's lots of things which are helping us in our virtual communication, where this whole meeting, it's been recorded, so I can whack it into a transcriber, I can look at the stuff that you said, I could even have conversation intelligence running on it, which is doing a sort of a talk listen ratio, even ones which are picking up on emotion and stuff. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, wow. That's quite a deep question.
Oh, it's a big one.
I'm going to give you 2 answers on that. And it's not quite the question you asked, but it's a good opportunity for me to touch on something. Let's talk about the nature of virtual communication rather than being in a room with someone. This comes up quite a lot as a question, which is, is listening different over Zoom compared to in a room? And the answer is, well, yes and no. The basic principles of listening, of course, are the same, right? Because they are what they are. There's some big differences, though, and I'll just highlight one big difference. There is, for all the disadvantages of listening virtually, we're limited on the non-verbal communication. If you look at both of our images, you can't see hands.
Yeah.
So picking up to the non-verbal is quite difficult. And of course, there are distractions aplenty. I've got a second screen here, which I could, if I wanted to, have all kinds of Instagram and all kinds of stuff on it. So there's that. But the positives are, and this sounds a little creepy, I don't mean it to be, but the positives are, in a physical situation, it would be really unusual to have the opportunity to just really absorb your image, Fred, in the way that I am. I can look at your facial expression, see you giving me minimal encourages, the nodding and the yes.
Yeah.
You know, so actually there's a very rich stream of information you can pick up. So there's good and bad on virtual communication. There's things that help us, things that don't. In terms of your specific question around, some of the tech, the AI that's now coming in, I think the jury's out on that stuff. Talk listen ratios, I'm very skeptical about. I think they're an interesting tool. Look at this conversation, look at this podcast. If we were to apply talk listen ratio to here, I'm doing 90% of the talking. Now I know that in some sales teams, when they analyze talk listen ratio, they put that in the bad category.
Yeah.
But it's contextual, isn't it? Because this would be a pretty rubbish podcast if I didn't say very much.
Yeah. If I wanted to talk more, I'll do a solo.
So it's highly contextual. So I think talk listen ratios are not like an interesting tool. It's like a speedometer in a car. It tells you something, but it's not necessarily good or bad. Sentiment analysis, I don't really know enough about. Everything I've read, I've done some research, says it's not quite there yet. And I think there's a long way to go before AI is as adept at sentiment analysis as the human brain. There's a long way to go before that happens.
Yeah, I guess it's the same with all these things. If you're using it, I always come back to the same expression that I picked up a little while ago, which is about augmenting the human. If you're using it as well as all of the human skills, and you just got it kind of maybe on the side or just something else you can check back on, or after conversation, I thought Graham said that, I made a note, but I wasn't dead short, so I am actually going to replay it, then it can make it better.
Yeah.
If it's like, I'm actually not going to listen, I'm going to play on Facebook because it's being recorded anyway. And I'll just read what he said because I can read faster than I can do it. It's easier. It's not as tiring. Listening's tiring, isn't it? Then, we're missing the point.
Yeah. One of the, just to pick up on that tiring point, I was doing some work with the sales team a little while back, and they were back to back meetings. They were trying to cram it all in. And I get it. That's quite often people don't have much choice about that. But to listen really effectively takes a lot of effort. It is mentally exhausting. And so I have a rule of thumb that if I'm actually applying some of these listening skills in some of the other work I do, I'll do a maximum of sort of 3 meetings a day, because anything more than that, it just doesn't work. I don't have the intellectual energy to give it what it needs. Just going to pick up on your.
I just want to say, isn't that interesting? You're an expert listener. You do 3 a day, but I'm going to do 6 a day. Why, Fred? Does that mean you're twice as good a listener as me? No.
Maybe you are.
Means you're probably not, and you think you are, but you're not, and you can't be because your brain won't be able to deal with that. Not at the level of the stuff that you should be, or you could be taking things away.
Yeah. And again, let's we have to give the reality check here, which is
true.
Not everyone has the luxury of saying I'm only going to do 3 meetings a day, and I think we just have to apply these things in the best way we possibly can, given that reality is reality. I wouldn't do 6 customer interviews for some of the things I do for folks. I wouldn't do 6 in a day. I just can't do that effectively and well. I could have 6 meetings a day, but I would be very careful about how I manage my diary to make sure that the meetings that really needed my attention, I was giving it my attention.
Yeah, spaced, time before, prep anyway. Maybe then if there's other things you're doing, they're kind of lighter weight meetings, easier ones, that you're almost saying, I'm probably not going to be listening as well as I could here. Now, if you're saying that, why are you having the meeting? would be my response. So, that's very interesting stuff. This, God, there's so many little side things we could go on, but we don't want people to get too tired. And that's why I'm trying to now looking at my length of podcasts. So you've intimated there's lots of information you can share around this. I listened to that. I wrote it down. And what's the best place to contact you then to get some of this?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Best place to contact me is on LinkedIn. So you can find my profile on LinkedIn. You can come to my website, www.cognis-consulting.com.
Cognis.
So Cognis, COGNIS -consulting.com. Or you can email me at graham@cognis-consulting.com. LinkedIn's probably easiest. Find me on LinkedIn, and I'll happily share any information I have. I have reading lists. I'm just happy to have a chat about the art and science of listening for anyone interested.
Brilliant. We'll pop those links. We'll put those links into the thing. So brilliant. Well, I do hope I've done you justice in listening properly.
You have.
Good. Well, I've got the editing suite anyway, so it'll come across as I have. No, unedited. I'm not going to edit this one, I promise. But no, Graham, seriously, thank you so much for sharing this stuff. Really cool. We will speak again soon, I'm pretty sure.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Fred.
Cheers, Graham.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. If you like what you've heard, why not subscribe so you know when the latest episodes become available? Take a look at my YouTube channel. All episodes are available there, along with extra material all about modern selling. Connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'll share more information around collaborative selling. All part of my mission around having good people doing good things in a good way.